Now we're going to move into Chapter 1. And I'm going to do this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. By now in college algebra, you should be able to solve linear equations because you've been doing that for at least 2 courses if you've been taking courses here. If you took them in high school and placed out of them to get in here, you did them in high school. But if you're doing solution of linear equations, there's a certain process. You have to get rid of parentheses, so remove your parentheses, combine any like terms, then use addition and subtraction of terms to move all of your variable terms to one side, all your constant terms to the other side. If we're working with a single variable, that will wind up, when you combine them, giving you a single variable term on one side and a single constant term on the other. Then you divide by the coefficient of the variable, and that gives you your answer. So here, if we remove the parentheses, let me check you up on your signs. If I remove the parentheses on the left side, what do I get? Plus or minus here? Make sure you get those signs correct. I still see, even at this level, a lot of people missing those signs, especially on that second term. So make sure you get those correct. So we remove the parentheses, normal distributive property to remove parentheses. Then, before you move any terms back and forth, I suggest maybe you combine like terms. The only terms I can combine are the 2 numbers on the right-hand side. To get that. And then if you can do this without writing the extra line in between, fine. If you need to write the extra line in here, do so. If I want to move the x terms to the left side and the numbers to the right, that means I need to move this over here. And I need to move this over here. So I wound up with 1 variable term on the left side and 1 number term on the right side. Divide by the coefficient of the variable. And you have an answer. Remember, your answer must be variable equals number, not minus 4 times the variable equals a number. It has to be variable equals a number. X equals. If it's not in that form, it's not a proper solution. This should be very simple for all of you at this level. You should be able to do that because that is a part of everything we do in solving equations, and we're going to be solving much more complicated equations than this. Now, one thing that continues to throw people is solving for a variable. And it shouldn't, because you don't do anything different from what we just did to solve that equation. Solving for a variable is exactly the same. You just can't combine like terms. There are no like terms to combine. But otherwise, you do exactly the same thing. We remove the parentheses. And if it says solve for a variable, like this one, here's an equation that says solve it for y. That means y equals everything else. That's what a solution is. Variable equals everything else. So solve for y means I want to take this and I want to rearrange it until it says y equals. I don't want y equals y. I want y equals all the other things. So I need all the y's on one side and all combined into one term. So first I'm going to have to remove my parentheses. Now, I don't have any like terms that I can combine, so I work with what I have. But I need to get all of my y terms on the same side. So I need to move this one over here, but I don't want anything except y terms, so I need to move this one over here. So I wind up with 3y equals 10w minus 6z minus 8. And those of you who've been in my classes before, you know that I never make mistakes, except I do. So if I do make a mistake here, and that happens sometimes because I'm talking and writing at the same time, and sometimes there's a disconnect between the two. So correct me when I do make mistakes. Let's not leave anything up there that's incorrect. We're almost there. All we need to do is divide by the coefficient. And let me write it up here. Y equals 10 W minus 6Z minus 8 over 3. And if you could reduce that fraction, do so, but it doesn't reduce, so that's the result. That's all that solving for a variable is. We didn't do anything any different in any of the steps we did here. We removed parentheses. Didn't have any like terms we could combine, so we worked with what we had. We moved all of the y terms to the left side, everything else to the right side. Then we divided by the coefficient of the y. That's all we did. So don't let it throw you if it says solve for a variable. You will be doing that more and more as you move higher in math. All right, so very simple. This one you might even be able to do by inspection. It's simple enough. But if not, do not be afraid to write things down. I just went through this with my Math 94 class. You know, writing down, and you know, they didn't like having so many steps in a problem. The higher you get, the longer it's going to be. I taught a calculus student last quarter, and she was commenting on how long some of the problems took. Yeah, they took a whole page or maybe a page and a half to do one problem. That's what happens as it gets more complicated. When you first learned to write, you'd write a letter at a time. Then you write a word. Then you wrote a sentence. Then you wrote a paragraph. Then you wrote a whole paper. They got longer and longer, didn't they? Same thing with math. The more complicated the problem, the more it takes to work it. All right, this one. What's the answer? X equals what? Subtract the 7x. Subtract the 11, divide by the coefficient. What about decimals? Do they throw you? Shouldn't. If you're doing it manually, just remember when you're multiplying decimals, you should wind up, the product has as many decimal places as the combination of both the factors. If you're dividing, you move the decimal place until your divisor is a whole number. Otherwise, you do the arithmetic as if they're whole numbers. A problem like this, you can actually get rid of the decimals. You could come through and multiply the whole thing by 100, and then you'd be working with whole numbers. Now, if you're using your calculator, you can probably even do better than that. But this should not throw you when you see a problem like that. Works out to be quite a same process for working it. You still have to remove parentheses, combine like terms, move all the x terms to one side, numbers to the other side, divide by the coefficient of the x. All right. If you solve that for p, what do you get? what's the form of the answer going to look like? Is it going to be x equals something? What's it going to look like? Just form. I don't mean the exact answer. P equals other stuff, right? That's what the answer needs to be. P equals the other stuff. How do I get that from here? What do I need to do to get P by itself? I've got to do something with the R and the T. How is it connected to the P? They're multiplied, aren't they? How do you undo a multiplication? Divide. What do I divide by? The R and the T. P equals I over RT. Same sort of thing you do as if they were numbers. Nothing any different. It's just you're doing them with letters. Solve this one for x. Did it throw you having x have a multiplier of 5 and a? It throws some people. It's tying up the x, isn't it? So we have to uncouple it from the x. How do you uncouple it from the x? Well, you're going to have to divide it. But one way to look at this, think back to when you were doing factoring. Remember the concept of a common factor that you divided out? That's all x is. It's a common factor. Divide it out, and you get this. But then I have x times something, and I want x by itself, so I divide by that something. It's still the same thing. It's just that we're not able to combine certain things together. So we have to work with them in an uncombined state. Move all of your x's to the left side, every other term to the right side. When I combine these x terms, I can't really combine them. So I have to leave them as two different terms, but they have the common factor of x that I can take out and get. So I have the x just in this one location. This does not include x. So I can divide by whatever that is and get x equals. So when you have another letter tying up the x, do something like that. Just, put it together with all the x terms, and then consider the x a common factor that you divide out. Everything else is in parentheses, and then that parenthesis are the multiplying coefficient. Divide by that coefficient. So an answer like that shouldn't throw you. You need to understand how to work with those and, you know, get past the fact that it looks a little strange. It's not anything any different. It just looks a little funny. But this all looked funny when you were in elementary school. So, you know, this is just a continuation of new things that look a little different at first, but if you get familiar with them, they're really not hard.